So I started the last podcast and I assumed I was talking through the headphone, but turns out it was getting the sound from the computer. It's audible, not as good a quality as this one, but just raise the volume and listen to it because I am feeling a little lazy to re-record it. Okay. If it's a serious problem, you can of course message me. So next up on adaptation responses for the water sector include adaptation technologies for sea level rise. Adaptation responses for limiting saltwater intrusion. Then you have technologies like limiting abstraction from shallow aquifers and barriers to fluvial saltwater intrusion. So oftentimes the ocean inundates groundwater systems when you extract groundwater from shallow aquifers, and this is a problem that's been on the rise across much of the coastlines around the world. Means of reducing abstraction of fresh water to sustainable levels through improved groundwater management. It may include scientific monitoring and scientific assessment, improvements in water use efficiency regulations, improved and coordinated well operations, and exploration of alternative water sources. Barriers to fluvial saltwater intrusion, so establishment of physical or hydraulic barriers to hinder saltwater intrusion. Physical barriers constructed parallel to the coast consisting of a low permeable material such as steel or concrete that acts to block the intrusion of saltwater into the aquifers. Okay, limiting somebody keeps trying to call me spam call. Limiting saltwater intrusion, increasing so we are continuing the same theme. Increasing sustainable aquifer recharge, so adding water to an aquifer through man-made systems such as recharge basins or check dams, injection wells, to increase the amount of fresh water and to control or prevent the intrusion of salt water. Okay, coastal groundwater level monitoring approaches and associated data infrastructure to establish an in-depth understanding of the hydraulic processes that lead to salinity intrusion in coastal areas. Of course, there is coastal surface water monitoring as well, monitoring approaches and associated data infrastructure to inform of the hydraulic processes that lead to salinity intrusion in coastal areas, focusing on the interactions with the surface water, which is drawn for all sorts of uses. Looking at built infrastructure for shoreline protection against sea level rise, we have revetments, so sloping shore parallel structures constructed landward of the beach to dissipate and reduce wave action at the boundary between the sea level and land. So there's always a debate about hard structures versus nature-based solutions, and which one is better, which one does more damage because they perturb the flow of sand and water and wave activity and so on. So in my oceanography course I have some discussion on these as well. Seawalls, as we said before, sea level rise projections are one thing, but building seawalls has a huge cost. So oftentimes the approach to seawalls is determined more by how much the community is willing or is able to afford to build seawalls against what level of sea level rise and so on. Solid engineered structures with primary function of protecting the shoreline, built parallel to the shore and aim to hold or prevent sliding of the soil while providing protection from wave action. There are a lot of details. So wave energy that gets dissipated naturally along natural coasts now begins to deposit energy at the seawall, and that can slowly degrade or destroy the seawalls as well. Land claim creates new land from areas that were previously below high tide. Land claim can be considered as an aggressive form of coastal protection that may be more accurately termed attack or advance the line according to shoreline management typology. So it's not a very nature-based, natural, or sustainable maybe in the long term as either. Excuse me. Beach nourishment, so primarily used to address coastal erosion, but it can also lead to flood reduction benefits, co-benefits. A soft engineering approach that involves addition of suitable quality sediment to a beach area that has sediment deficit. This can be supremely expensive. Counties like Santa Barbara or I think Santa Barbara is doing it, but it's a rich community, so this really can cost a lot of money. Plus you're transporting sand or other material from one place to another, trying to recollect maybe and bring it back, so the cost and emissions life cycle analysis, etc., can be tricky. Storm surge barriers and closure dams have hard engineered structures with the primary function of preventing coastal flooding. Their secondary role is to shorten the required length of defenses behind the barrier. Storm surge barriers are movable or fixed barriers or gates that are closed to prevent flooding when an extreme water level is forecast. Breakwaters, shore parallel structures located just offshore of the surf zone. They are designed to intercept and reduce incoming wave energy at the shoreline. They thereby protect the shore coastline behind breakwaters and encourage sediment accumulation, resulting in beach widening. Dikes. The primary function of dikes is to protect low-lying coastal areas from sea inundation under extreme conditions. Obviously, Netherlands is famous for its dike stories. The boy who protected the city by sitting there when the dike was broken, and so on and so forth. Dikes have a high volume that helps to resist water pressure, sloping sides to reduce wave loadings, and crest at heights sufficient to prevent overtopping by floodwaters, and so on. Groins, also spelled as Groins in the US, narrow shore perpendicular hard structures designed to interrupt longshore sediment transport by trapping a portion of the sediment that would otherwise be transported along shore. But this seriously perturbs the waves and the transportation, so often you need post facto readjustment of the collection of sediments and sand on one side of the groin as opposed to depletion on the other side. Again, I've discussed this on the chapter on coastlines in my oceanography course. Jetties or inlet structures, hard structures built at the banks of tidal inlets and river mouths to trap longshore sediment, thereby stabilizing the inlet or river mouth and preventing channel siltation. Okay. Artificial reefs. An artificial reef is a submerged or partly exposed to tide structure that deliberately placed on the seabed to mimic functions of a natural reef, such as protecting, regenerating, concentrating and or enhancing populations of living marine resources. As we've discussed elsewhere, anything you put in the water, even dumping tanks and jeeps and bridges that are destroyed and so on, can become fish aggregating devices, because biology begins to grow on it and an ecosystem forms, just like corals, recycling ecosystems, and they bivalves, shelled animals, shellfish can begin to filter the water, increase oxygen levels, clean the water and make it more productive, and so on and so forth. So kind of a nature-based solution as well. So these are green infrastructure for shoreline protection. Sorry, I failed to mention that before. This was built infrastructure. These are green infrastructure, so that's how the report distinguishes them. Restoration and protection of corals and oyster reefs, cliff stabilization, seagrass beds, coastal wetlands including mangroves, and dune construction and rehabilitation. So these are the green infrastructure for shoreline protection. What are dune construction and rehabilitation as an example after skipping all these text? Natural dune rehabilitation refers to restoring degraded natural or artificial dunes to optimize coastal protection benefits. Artificial dune construction and dune rehabilitation are technologies aimed at reducing both coastal erosion and flooding in adjacent coastal lowlands. Okay. Accommodation and management. coastal zoning, floating agricultural systems, flood proofing, and managed coastal realignment. Let's read this floating agricultural systems. Floating agriculture is a way of producing food in areas that are waterlogged for long periods of time. It's mainly aimed at adapting to increased or prolonged flooding. The system employs beds of rotting vegetation that act as compost for crop growth. The beds are able to float on the surface of the water, thus creating areas for agricultural use in waterlogged areas. Kind of a hydroponics idea. Now they are being extensively used to grow even things like algae and seaweeds that are used to for food, for feeding to cattle. Cattle are supposed to have reduced methane emission when certain algae are fed to them, or the fat content of the milk are enhanced as well. Okay. Finally, accommodation and management, coastal setbacks and fluvial sediment management. So this is harder than one imagines because it involves incentivizing people to move away from the coast. So a prescribed distance to a coastal feature, such as a line of permanent vegetation within which all or certain types of development are prohibited. Fluvial sediment management includes the holistic management of sediment supply from rivers to the coast, taking the full range of human activities at the river basin into account. Okay, so we'll come back and do disaster preparedness in the next podcast. Obviously, I'm skipping a lot of the text here, which are useful, but you can go back and read them since I'm taking only few pieces of those. This is the last part of this adaptation technologies for disaster preparedness. I'm getting hungry, lunchtime. I have one more report to cover after this for adaptation for the water sector. Okay, so we'll come back and do that next podcast.